You've felt this your whole life, even if you've never named it. That sense that wherever you go, chaos follows, not always disaster, not always drama, but disruption, instability, sudden changes, things that were stable suddenly aren't, people who were calm suddenly aren't, plans that seemed solid suddenly fall apart, and you're always at the center of it. Psychology calls it bad luck, self-sabotage, poor boundaries. Jung called it the trickster archetype, and it exists for a reason. Because you're not attracting chaos randomly. You're creating it, not consciously, not maliciously, but unconsciously, through a pattern so deep you don't even see it operating. And that pattern, it's keeping you safe, keeping you free, keeping you from ever being trapped, controlled, or pinned down, even if it's destroying everything you're trying to build. Before we go deeper, you need to understand something. The trickster isn't a personality disorder, it's an archetype, one of the oldest, most universal patterns in human psychology. Every culture has a trickster figure. Loki in Norse mythology, who causes chaos among the gods; Coyote in Native American stories, who disrupts order to reveal truth; Anansi the spider, who uses cunning and deception to survive; Hermes, the messenger god who exists between worlds, never fully belonging to either. These aren't just myths, they're psychological patterns that repeat across time and culture because they represent something fundamental about human consciousness. The part of us that refuses to be contained, that questions authority, that disrupts systems, that exposes hypocrisy through humor, chaos, or boundary violation. Jung studied the trickster his entire life, and he understood that this archetype serves a function. It breaks down rigid structures, it reveals what's hidden, it forces transformation through disruption. But when it's unconscious, when you don't know you're operating from this pattern, it doesn't liberate, it destroys. Because the trickster doesn't just disrupt others, it disrupts you. Your relationships, your stability, your ability to build anything that lasts, and you don't understand why. You think it's bad luck, you think it's other people, you think the universe is against you, but it's not, it's you. And until you make this pattern conscious, it will keep burning down everything you try to create. Let me show you exactly how this pattern gets installed, because you weren't born chaotic. You were made chaotic through a childhood where chaos was the only way to survive. Maybe you grew up in a home with rigid control, authoritarian parents who demanded obedience, compliance, perfection, and you learned early that the only way to have any freedom, any autonomy, any sense of self was to disrupt, to break the rules just enough to breathe, to create small rebellions that gave you space, so chaos became your tool, your weapon, your only path to freedom. Or maybe you grew up in a home that was already chaotic, unstable, unpredictable, and you learned that stability was a lie, that order was temporary, that the moment you trusted something, it would collapse, so you became the one who created the chaos. Because if you're the source, at least you're in control, at least you see it coming, at least you're not the victim. Or maybe you were the family scapegoat, the black sheep, the one who got blamed for everything, and you realized that if you're going to be accused anyway, you might as well earn it. So you became chaotic, disruptive, unpredictable, because if they're going to reject you, at least it will be for something real. At least it will be on your terms. Or maybe you learned early that being good, being compliant, being stable meant being invisible, ignored, forgotten. And the only time anyone paid attention was when something went wrong, when there was drama, when there was chaos, so you created it, not because you wanted negative attention, but because any attention was better than none. Or maybe you were too smart, too aware, too perceptive, and you saw through the performance, the hypocrisy, the unspoken rules that everyone pretended made sense, and you couldn't unsee it, so you became the one who pointed it out, who disrupted the pretense, who made people uncomfortable by saying what everyone knew but no one would name, and they called you chaotic, difficult, a troublemaker, but you were just awake in a room full of people pretending to sleep. Any of this landing because the trickster isn't born from malice, it's born from survival, from a childhood where disruption was the only power you had, where chaos was the only freedom, where being unpredictable was the only way to avoid being controlled, ignored, or destroyed. And you adapted, you became the trickster, not in costume, not in myth, but in pattern, in the way you relate to stability, authority, and structure. And now it follows you everywhere, and you can't figure out why. So what does the trickster archetype actually look like in adulthood? How do you know if this is your pattern? First, you can't sustain stability. Things will be going well, job, relationship, living situation, and suddenly something happens. You say something you shouldn't, you make a choice that doesn't make sense. You create a conflict out of nowhere, and everything destabilizes, and you don't even know why you did it, you just did. And people blame you, they say you self-sabotage, that you're afraid of success, that you don't know what you want, but that's not it. You're not afraid of success. You're afraid of being trapped, and stability to you feels like a cage, so you blow it up, not consciously, but unconsciously, because the trickster would rather destroy than be contained. Second, you're drawn to boundary violations, not necessarily harmful ones, but you push limits, you test rules, you see how far you can go, you say the thing no one else will say, you do the thing no one else will do, and sometimes it's brilliant, sometimes it reveals truth, but sometimes it just creates unnecessary chaos. And you tell yourself you're being authentic, honest, real, but really, you're being the trickster. You're disrupting because disruption is your comfort zone. Because if everything's unstable, no one can pin you down, no one can control you, no one can expect consistency from you. Third, your humor has an edge. You're funny, charismatic, quick-witted, but your jokes often land just on the edge of acceptable. You push buttons, you make people uncomfortable. You reveal what they're trying to hide, and sometimes they laugh, but sometimes they don't. And you've lost relationships, jobs, opportunities because you didn't know when to stop. Because trickster humor isn't just humor, it's a weapon. It's how you maintain power in situations where you feel powerless. It's how you disrupt hierarchy. It's how you avoid vulnerability by making everything a game. Fourth, people don't trust you, not because you lie, though sometimes you do in small ways just to keep things interesting, but because you're unpredictable. They can't count on you. You say you'll do something and then you don't. You commit and then you vanish. You're present and then you're gone, and they never know which version of you they're getting. And you hate being seen this way. You want to be trusted, but you also can't stand the weight of people's expectations, so you create chaos to escape them, and then you wonder why no one stays. Fifth, you're exhausted because being the trickster is exhausting, always disrupting, always performing, always keeping everyone off balance so they can't see too deep. It's not freedom, it's survival mode, and deep down you know it, but you don't know how to stop. And maybe this is the first time anyone has named it without anger, not as manipulation you need to fix, but as a survival pattern that once kept you alive, as protection that's now become prison. Now let's talk about what's hiding beneath all of this, because the trickster has a shadow, and that shadow is the need for stability you refuse to admit. Because here's the truth, you don't actually want chaos, you want safety. But safety to you has always come with conditions, control, expectations, the loss of self, so you reject it, you blow it up, you run from it, and you tell yourself you prefer freedom. But it's not freedom, it's fear. Fear that if you land anywhere, if you commit to anything, if you let anyone really see you, they'll trap you, use you, control you, destroy you. Jung explored how everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And the trickster's greatest irritation, people who are stable, consistent, predictable, committed, you judge them, you think they're boring, asleep, domesticated, selling out. But that's projection. What you're actually seeing in them is the part of yourself you're terrified to become. The part that wants to land, that wants to build, that wants to be known, and you can't stand it. Because if you admit you want stability, you have to face why you're so afraid of it, and that's too painful. So you stay in motion, always moving, always shifting, always one step ahead of anyone who tries to get close, and you call it freedom, but it's exile, self-imposed exile, and it's lonelier than you'll ever admit. Here's what no one tells you about the trickster archetype. It doesn't just disrupt systems, it self-destructs. Because chaos has diminishing returns, at 25 being chaotic is exciting, magnetic, people are drawn to your unpredictability. But at 35, 45, it's exhausting. People stop finding it charming. They start finding it unreliable, immature, damaging. And you feel it. You feel people pulling away. You feel opportunities closing. You feel the gap between the life you could have built and the rubble you're standing in, and it's unbearable. So you do one of three things. First, you double down. You become more chaotic, more disruptive, more unpredictable. You tell yourself the problem is that people can't handle you, that they're too conventional, too boring, too afraid, so you surround yourself with other chaos, other tricksters, and you call it freedom, but it's just a louder prison. Second, you collapse into rigidity, you overcorrect, you become the opposite of the trickster. You lock yourself into structure, routine, control. You take a soul-crushing job, you force yourself into relationships that feel dead. You white-knuckle stability, and you call it growth, but it's not integration, it's suppression. And eventually, the trickster will explode because you can't kill an archetype. You can only integrate it or be destroyed by it. Third, you destroy everything and start over, again and again and again. New city, new job, new relationship, new identity. You tell yourself this time will be different, but it won't, because you're bringing the same pattern, and the pattern always wins. And this is why Jung was so concerned with the trickster, because when it's unconscious, it's not liberating, it's annihilating, not through malice, through refusal, refusal to land, refusal to be seen, refusal to build anything that could be taken away. What looks like dysfunction is often intelligence under pressure, but intelligence that only knows how to disrupt becomes its own trap. So how do you integrate the trickster? How do you keep the gifts, the creativity, the perception, the boundary-breaking insight without destroying everything you touch? First, stop calling it chaos. This isn't randomness, it's a pattern, and it served a purpose. At some point in your life, disruption kept you safe, gave you power, protected you from control, invisibility, or annihilation. You need to honor that, not shame it. So stop listening to people who call you a problem. They don't understand, and their judgment will only make you perform the role harder. What you need isn't condemnation, it's curiosity. Why does stability feel like a threat? What does landing represent? What are you protecting yourself from by staying in motion? Second, you'll eventually be asked to grieve the cost, because the trickster doesn't come for free. It costs relationships, opportunities, trust, the ability to build anything that lasts, and as long as you tell yourself you don't care, you can avoid the grief. But you care deeply, you just can't admit it, because admitting it means admitting you've been running from the very things you want, and that's devastating. But it's also the doorway, because you can't integrate what you won't feel. Third, find stability that doesn't trap. This is the key, because you're not afraid of stability itself. You're afraid of the kind of stability that came with conditions, that demanded you shrink, that used commitment as control. But not all stability is a cage. Some stability is a foundation. Some structure creates space for freedom instead of killing it. Some commitments expand you instead of limiting you. Find those people, find those situations, because they prove that you can land without dying. Fourth, you'll be asked to learn the difference between truth-telling and chaos creation, because the trickster's gift is seeing through pretense, exposing hypocrisy, speaking what others won't. That's valuable, that's necessary. But not every truth needs to be spoken, not every boundary needs to be tested, not every system needs to be disrupted, and if you're disrupting for the sake of disrupting, you're not serving truth, you're serving the pattern. So ask yourself, is this revelation necessary, or is this chaos comfortable? Am I exposing something that needs light, or am I just making sure nothing gets too stable? Fifth, learn to build, not perform, not disrupt. Build something small, something real, something that requires you to stay, to commit, to show up when it's boring, when it's hard, when it's not exciting anymore. Because the trickster's terror is permanence, but permanence isn't death. Permanence is what happens when you stop running long enough to create something that outlasts the moment, and you'll never know what you're capable of building until you stop burning everything down. Here's what Carl Jung understood that most people miss. The trickster isn't your enemy, it's your medicine, but only if you make it conscious. The trickster is the part of you that refuses to be tamed, that questions everything, that sees through illusion, that breaks down systems that need to break, that speaks truth no one else will speak. You don't want to kill that, you want to integrate it. And integration doesn't mean becoming boring. It doesn't mean domestication. It doesn't mean betraying your wild, free, truth-telling self. It means this: you keep the perception, you keep the courage, you keep the boundary-breaking insight, but you stop using chaos as a weapon against intimacy. You stop disrupting to avoid being seen. You stop running to prove you can't be caught. Because the mature trickster doesn't create chaos to escape. The mature trickster disrupts consciously, strategically, in service of something larger than survival, in service of truth, of transformation, of liberation, not just for you, but for others. But you can't get there while you're unconscious. You can't get there while chaos is still your default. You can't get there while you're still convinced that landing means losing yourself. You'll eventually be asked to land, not because landing is giving up, but because landing is the only way the trickster's gifts can actually matter, because disruption without direction is just noise, and you were meant for more than noise. So stop running from stability, stop equating commitment with captivity, stop telling yourself that chaos is freedom. Chaos isn't freedom, it's fear wearing a mask. And now it's time to take the mask off, to let people see the trickster, not the performance, not the chaos, but the intelligence beneath it, the perception, the wound, the reason you learned to never stay still. Jung explored how the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and you can't become who you are while you're still running, while you're still disrupting to avoid being known, while you're still burning down everything that might reveal you. That's not freedom, that's hiding, and you've been hiding long enough. And the next choice you make today, not someday, is where this pattern either ends or deepens. Do you create chaos to escape, or do you finally stay still long enough to see what you're running from? The moment you close this video, you'll know which one you're choosing.